What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here again today for another BFR. Not BFR. Whoa. We got a couple days before the first one there. We have another video regarding players that I have a respect for that maybe don't get recognition. We talked about the Hall of Great, guys who potentially could be, will be, or probably should be in the Hall of Fame. In that video, we also talked about Hall of Famers, but I also wanted to I also previewed briefly something that I wanted to do, and that's kind of my own Hall of Fame. Guys who are never going to make the Hall of Fame and not going to make the Hall of Fame likely in my lifetime or probably ever. But players that I really enjoyed watching, there's something about them that I really enjoyed. And so I got a list of players right here. I got all of them I can think of. So this will be the first class of the BHOF, the Brandon Hall of Fame. And we'll start at the top. We'll go by row. I kind of got this separated by forwards, defensemen, and goaltenders. Start at the top with Radim Vrbata. Vrbata was always one of my favorite players growing up. Found his way in Arizona a lot. It was a Blackhawk before I started watching the team. Guy we should have never got rid of. Always ended up back in Phoenix or Arizona and played really well there. Vancouver had a couple good years. I believe he was in an all-star game in Vancouver. Vrbata, just overall a very cool name, and just I never really knew what it was about a lot of these players. Something about them just really stuck out, and these were just guys I remember just when I think of my favorite players that didn't play with the Hawks, didn't play with the Hawks while I was watching them. These are the guys who I think of. Rene Bourque, another guy who was a Blackhawk, who they shouldn't have gotten rid of, but still, I remember him in Calgary, remember him in Montreal. That's a player I really liked. I got no real reason for it. These weren't star players. These weren't Vrbata had some all-star seasons. Bourque never, I don't think, had an all-star season. But just something about him, the way he played, the way his name looked on the jersey, whatever it was, something I liked about him. Brandon Sutter's kind of a different case. Obviously, he shares the same first name as me. And I remember there being a lot of Sutters at this point. I remember there were a lot of Sutters, not at this point in the game. That was more so in the 80s and 90s with the Sutter brothers. And now a lot of them were coaches. But Brandon Sutter was always one that stuck out to me when he was in Carolina and then when he was in Pittsburgh. And then he ended up in Vancouver near the end of his career. Just a player I really liked. A good face-off guy. Good third, middle six center if you needed one. And I know in NHL franchise mode, when I play NHL 10, I'd always put Vrbata, Bourque, and Sutter on the same line together because those are just three players I really liked. Now, getting into guys that some of these guys did play on Blackhawks rosters at some point. I remember being very excited in 2015 when Antoine Vermette was acquired at the trade deadline, and because he was one of my favorite players at the time that didn't play in Chicago. And so that 2015 team was always special because you had Brad Richards, Hall of Great. He's not on the board because he's in the Hall of Great, but otherwise he would be. But then you got Vermette. It was just a very fun team, a team full of my favorite players. It was just really cool. But Vermette played with some teams. He played in Ottawa, played in Columbus, Chicago, Anaheim, and Phoenix or Arizona. And good career. Another guy that's really good on the penalty kill, face-offs, that sort of thing. And he had some key goals for the Blackhawks in that 2015 Cup run, so can't complain. Mike Fisher. I like to tell the story that I didn't know who Carrie Underwood was until I only knew who Carrie Underwood was because of Mike Fisher. Usually it's the reverse effect. People know who Mike Fisher is because of Carrie Underwood, or Carrie Fisher now. But Mike Fisher, Ottawa, Nashville, one of my favorite players. Can't really tell you what it was. Just something about him that I really liked his game. And, not a whole lot to say. Just, I really like the game. I like the player. Patrick Sharp, you really don't need an explanation. I already debatably put him in the Hall of Great, but I don't think he has a chance at the Hall of Fame, so I didn't bother. Couple All-Star games, 3 Stanley Cups. Did he have Olympic gold one year? I think he did. But really can't complain. One of the Hawks' all-time forwards, just based off not the point totals, but the way he played the game. He was considered the most handsome man in Chicago for about a decade, and you could argue that still, even though I don't think he lives in Chicago anymore because he's in the Phillies front office, I believe. Peter Sikora. Now we're getting... There are some guys on this list I didn't watch play a whole ton. It was near the end of their careers when I started watching hockey, and Sikora kind of applies. But as I watch highlights and I watch just other stuff, I look at old hockey cards. Sikora was just one of my favorite players just by seeing all the teams he played for, the big deals he was involved in, some of the stuff like him getting killed by Derian Hatcher in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2000, and then the team bringing the cup to the hospital where he was at so he could still be with the cup. So, for Sikora, a great long career, and another guy that's considered a very clutch player. Miroslav Satan, Shaitan, it's not Satan before, yeah, it's not. And if he played with the Devils, that would have been something, but he did not. Buffalo, Boston, of course, Pittsburgh, he won a Stanley Cup there. Just a cool. I kind of think I liked him because of his name. I thought it was just a funny name to have. Trying to find reasoning behind these, but not all these have reasoning. Some of these are just. A lot of these players were good players. I mean, they were all, I'd argue, pretty good players, except for a few of them, which we'll get to. I mean, don't get me wrong. These were all NHLers. They were all good players, but some of them were better than others, of course. Sikora sticks out as one of those guys. I mean, Sikora, Shaitan, the guy who's next on this list, guys who scored a ton of points, but probably will never get the recognition they probably deserve. And one of those guys is Danny Briere. Danny Briere, I fell in love with during the 2010 finals between the Hawks and the Flyers. Briere was an electric forward. I've never seen a player have so much swagger, have so much skill, and just so much aura as he played the game. His celebrations, the way he scored, his shot, everything about Briere, and a really sick last name in Briere. One of my favorite players. I can't really argue anything about that. Alex Tanguay, notably for Colorado and Calgary. Also believe he played in Montreal and Tampa very briefly. But Tanguay, pretty good player. Won some Stanley Cups, or won a Stanley Cup. But it's kind of similar vein to Sikora. Scored a ton of points. One of my favorite players. Just didn't play a lot after I started watching hockey. Now, someone who didn't play a game when I was watching hockey was Valeri Bure. Looking at his stats, looking at who he was related to in Pavel Bure, and that sort of thing. Valeri Bure belongs on this list of my own Hall of Fame. Ben Smith. I've talked about Ben Smith before on this channel. There's a career video for him on this channel. A clutch player that Chicago desperately they didn't need, but he just always found the goal. Like, he wasn't the most talented forward. He was one of the Blackhawks prospects in the Stanley Cup years. He always found the way to get that big goal when he needed it. Whether it was 2011 or 2014, those are his two big years that really stick out. Although he was on the team in 2013 and was part of the Stanley Cup team, I never really figured out why he just never really panned out, because he was such a clutch player when you needed it. David Krejci. This was another one where I debated putting in the Hall of Great or my own Hall of Fame. I decided on my own Hall of Fame because I don't think he has I don't think he has the totals to get into the Hall of Fame, nor the hardware or anything like that. He might be one of those that's always close, but never really gets into that conversation. So I think he deserves a spot here, spending his entire career with Boston. This one's a little controversial, but Steve Bernier, one of my first hockey cards when he was with San Jose. Also have his hockey card from when he was with Vancouver. And I remember him nearly killing, I want to say, was Scuderi. I was at Rob Scuderi during the 2012 Stanley Cup Final, Game 6. Didn't really like when he did that much, but Steve Bernier, always thought he was a cool player. I don't really have a rhyme or reason to really like him, but he's in my Hall of Fame just because he was a player I liked as a kid. Jussi Jokinen, the shootout merchant. This guy, going 9 for 9 in shootouts in one season was kind of insane. He had that one move where I call it the Kopitar, where he slicks it around that way, or the Tarasenko. I've seen both of them do it. They'll hold the stick and then they'll wrap it around and with one hand tuck it into the other side of the net. He was a master at shootouts. He pulled off some really good moves. Never really felt at some points was overrated in his career, but other times was underrated. But played a lot and can't complain. Johnny Gaudreau had to be on the list. Johnny Hockey, how could he not be on the list? Taken from us way too soon. Still tragic what happened with Johnny Gaudreau, and it's not a day that goes by that someone isn't thinking about what could have been a Hall of Fame career. And while he probably will never get into the Hall of Fame because his career ended so shortly, although he probably would have been had it not been ended shortly, he's a player that'll never be remembered. So I'll never be forgotten, I should say. And I'm going to have him remembered here by being in my own Hall of Fame. So that way I would never be able to forget about him either. Steve Sullivan played briefly as a Blackhawk. Another guy. You look at Gaudreau, you look at Sullivan. Some of the guys on this list, they were kind of short players. They didn't really have the height, but they were still able to really be very productive at the NHL level. And Gaudreau and Sullivan are two prime pieces of that. Danny Heatley, I debated putting on the Hall of Great because I know I mentioned in the Hall of Great a lot where the longevity of someone's thing, like if he had the longevity, they could have been there. Heatley's fall off was kind of generational. People make jokes. 50 in 07. All-Star in 07. Danny Heatley All-Star. Truth be told, that man was an absolute all-star. And also, he had 50 goals in 2006 too, but no one mentions that. He's a two-time 50-goal scorer, two-time 100-point scorer, All-Star Game MVP, second overall pick in his career. Only thing he really never got is a Stanley Cup. If you took the start of his career until 2010, 2009, 10, 10, 11, you can end it right there, Hall of Fame career. It's what happened 2011 and beyond that really just, the fall off was fast, and that contract he got given, he played in the minors for some of it. It never, I don't know what happened. It completely he fell off a cliff. Marty Havlat. I started watching hockey the last season he was in Chicago, and was one of the Hawks' best players when he was there. So of course I was one of the first players I remember, and of course I'm going to fall in love with a guy like that. Taves and Kane, and Havlat actually led the team in scoring in 2009. So yeah, he's one of my favorite players. Now, speaking of that era, 2009 through 2011, who did the Hawks play a ton in every single year there? The Vancouver Canucks. I talk about how that 2011 Canucks team might have been one of the worst teams on paper to ever make the Stanley Cup final. But you know what? That team did win a lot of games, and they put up a lot of points in the regular season in 2011 and 2012. There weren't a lot of players on that team that I liked. You had the Sedins and Luongo, who I respected. But Mason Raymond, he was a player, probably the only player on that team where I'd actually say, yeah, I liked him. Rhyme or reason? Not really many. I just thought he was a good player. Simple as that. RJ Umberger, I liked because of his name and when he was one of my first hockey cards, so he's on here. Andy McDonald, one of those guys, short player, still put up a ton of points when he played. Very good player in Anaheim, a key piece on that 2007 Stanley Cup team. And I had his hockey card from St. Louis as well. So I think that's a big piece of it. A lot of my earliest hockey cards were a lot of these players, so that kind of sticks out. Derek Brassard's he's also one to be on that list. Brassard had a very long career. I remember when he finally called it quits, I thought he was never going to call it quits. He played a very long time with a lot of different teams. I thought he was going to break the record for that. But someone always wanted him, so he'd always go to play there. And he's associated with the Mika Zibanejad trade, which is one of the most lopsided deals, you could argue, in recent history. But Brassard was a good player. I have no arguments there. I really only have one enforcer on this list, and that's Jared Boll. I thought he had a funny name. He never really made me angry, so I'm not a big fan of enforcers, but Jared Boll, that's a good one. Jeremy Morin, similar vein to Ben Smith. He had all the talent in the world, but just could not put it together at the NHL level, and the Hawks gave him a couple tries. Just never got it going, and it's a real shame because I thought Smith and Morin were going to be great. When they had like a moment where when you'd see them with the puck, and Smith was getting clutch goals, and Morin had the talent, he just didn't have the finish. Yeah, just two guys that are big what ifs for me as Blackhawks. Peter Regan came in during the 2014 season, 13-14, and he played up and down the lineup. He's another guy I had a hockey card of when he was in Ottawa. No rhyme or reason why I really liked him, but I think it was his name. I thought he had just a cool name, but Peter Regan makes the list. Wojciech Wolski. The reason I put him on the board, growing up in a Polish family, Wolski is a very Polish name. Wojciech Wolski, that's pretty much as Polish as you can get. So that was a name that was always talked about in my household. Even though he was playing in Phoenix, yeah, he was also in Colorado at points as well. But that's just a name that stuck out, so he goes in the Brandon Hall of Fame. And Drew Stafford. I got a couple of Buffalo Sabres on the board, now that I think about it. Who else up here was Buffalo? Shatan, Briere. I'm not sure if Steve Bernier was. I don't think he was. Yeah, and Stafford. And we're not done with Sabres either, but Stafford was one of those Sabres in the early 2010s. I liked Pominville, but just Stafford was that next level. I thought about putting Pominville on the board. Didn't think he really cracked the criteria. He was. I liked him. I just think he was one of my favorite players in the league. Maxim Afinogenov, super cool name, crazy talented. Some would argue about his work ethic, but he scored some of the most pretty goals I've ever seen. So he goes on the board. Mike Ribeiro, Louis Eriksson, Jere Lehtinen, and James Neal are all from the same era of Dallas Stars, so I kind of lumped them all together. Ribeiro, although some of his off-ice stuff now is when he played, I really liked Mike Ribeiro. I thought he had a good set of moves in his arsenal, and seemed to be one that always would score against the Hawks. Louis Eriksson, post Vancouver, before Vancouver, I thought he was one of my top 10 favorite players in the league. I loved Louis Eriksson. His goal-scoring ability, his name on the back of the Dallas jersey just looked very sleek. That's what I always say. I liked him in Dallas the best. Whatever happened when he got to Vancouver, it just didn't work, and then it kind of faded to irrelevance. Jere Lehtinen, one of the best two-way players to play the game in the 2000s. One of my earliest hockey cards. And, belongs here for sure. And James Neal, I kind of was thinking about names. I have my favorite players. Verbata, Bork, Sutter, Vermette, Fisher. Those 5 all belong there. Raymond's another one. And James Neal, definitely. Those probably are just Briere. Those are names when I think of my favorite players of when they played. Those are all guys who I think of immediately. Of course, James Neal ended up playing in Vegas and going to the final with them in 2018, which made me like him even more because I'm pretty sure he was basically the captain of that team, although he was an alternate captain. He had 40-goal seasons, I believe, at some point. I think in Pittsburgh, played in Dallas, played in Edmonton and Calgary, Nashville. One of my favorite players. That rounds out the forwards. Now we're moving on to defensemen. Don't have a lot of defensemen on the board. Daryl Sador, just a great all-around defenseman. Really provided a good defensive mindset, but also could punch it up offensively if you needed him to. I think he won 3 Stanley Cups with 3 different teams, if I remember correctly, with Dallas, with Tampa, and with Pittsburgh. Matthew Schneider, great offensive defenseman. That's one of those players I wish I could have saw play more because he was done with his career pretty much by the time I was born. Dustin Byfuglien, how could he not be on the board? Could have put him as a forward because I remember him most as a forward. 2010 Blackhawks run, you could have argued him for the Conn Smythe. He was scoring once every game. That hat trick he had in Vancouver in Game 3 in 2010, he scored pretty much every game the rest of the playoff run. I don't think he scored against Nashville in round 1 or games 1 and 2 against Vancouver. Game 3 against Vancouver, Game 4, 5, 6, swept San Jose, played Philly. I think he had 2 goals in one of those games. 11 goals in the playoffs, scoring pretty much every game. Vladimir Konstantinov. You could argue one day he might make the Hall of Fame because he's part of the Russian Five, because of his defector status. I'm not sure for now if he gets in there, but for now, who knows what his career could have been. He probably could have been a Hall of Famer had another tragic incident not had happened following, I think it was 6 days after the 97 Stanley Cup where he, Fetisov, and a team trainer were injured in that car accident. And of course, Fetisov, he was near the end of his career, but he played a few more years, won another Stanley Cup, and he ended up making the Hall of Fame because he was a very big piece of that Russian Five and defector whole thing. Konstantinov, his name got on the Stanley Cup in 98, even though he never played a game for the Red Wings. It's very rare that someone's name gets on the Stanley Cup who doesn't play as a player. But the Red Wings, I believe, to this day, won in 98, all for that man right there. Inspiration, the fact that he was able to come back from such a devastating injury and while not play in the NHL ever again, surviving. And although he was just not able to really function fully at a lot of points, he was still able to be a great ambassador. Like you see, like I'm pretty sure he still lives in Detroit, Michigan. He never ended up going back to Russia. So Konstantinov, an inspiration for everyone. Nicholas Jarmelson is the Patrick Sharp of the defense right now. While Sharp not going to be a Hall of Famer, Jarmelson was probably one of the most discredited people for those 2010, 13, and 15 Stanley Cup runs. Shot blocking machine, could score a goal here and there, and one of probably the greatest defensive defensemen for the Blackhawks all time, you could argue. Christian Ehrhoff, another Buffalo Sabre on the board. Played in Vancouver and San Jose. Ehrhoff was just one of my favorite players to play the game. One of my favorite defensemen in the league when I was younger. I think I really liked his name. I think the two H's really threw me off when I didn't understand how other countries had like different last names like that and stuff and different sounding syllables. But Ehrhoff, he gets it. And Craig Rivet, he also played in Buffalo. But a lot of Sabres on the board. But Rivet played in San Jose as well. Montreal. Off the top of my head, I can't really remember anything else. But it's one of my favorite. That's a favorite defenseman of mine. Just seeing him play, seeing his name, seeing everything like that. It's really, some of these are really random, but just they stick out. That's how I debate them. Like I think of like my favorite players, and I'll think of a name like that, and I'll think, yeah, he belongs on this board. Moving on to goaltenders. Not a ton of goaltenders, but we'll start with the former Blackhawk and Jocelyn Thibault. The reason he's on the board. My dad on the PS2, I believe, had NHL 04 before I ever had an Xbox 360. That was my first time playing an NHL game, and Thibault was the goaltender for the Blackhawks. And I remember being very confused because I didn't understand at the time how it wasn't the most modern game, and NHL 10 had just like come out. I did end up getting NHL 10 for the 360. That was my first Xbox game. But Jocelyn Thibault was the goaltender in that game. I remember there was a glitch from center ice. You hit like I think it was the X button, and he would score from center ice every time. And Alexei Zhamnov is not on the board, but I would score about 20 goals a game with Alexei Zhamnov, and it was real. Don't ask me why, but I remember it being very fun. Another Blackhawks goaltender, Nikolai Khabibulin, left Chicago right as I was getting into hockey in 2009, along with Havlat, and it's the Bulin Wall. How could you not love the Bulin Wall? Won a cup in Tampa. Before that was with Winnipeg and Phoenix. Came to Chicago. Underperformed his first couple of years, but that was also because he had a horrible team in front of him. People forget that. And then finished his career with the pretty bad Edmonton team and came back to Chicago for 4 games before he had a season-ending injury. And I believe he only recently came out of retirement and then retired again in his 50s to play in Russia, but I don't know. Marty Turco, another Blackhawk for one season in 2010-11 as the backup to Crawford. He was the goalie I was mostly scoring on with Zhamnov back in NHL 04 with Thibault in my net. Just a goaltender that I thought never got the praise he deserved. Turco was an excellent goaltender. His playoff record, people would put it all on him. The problem was Dallas couldn't score goals in the early and mid-2000s. Later on, they couldn't keep the puck out of their net. That's when they could have used a guy like Turco. Craig Anderson is from my hometown, so I had to put him on the board. Played in Chicago too, so there's a familiar theme here, but he's the last one of these guys to ever play in Chicago. But Craig Anderson played a very long career. Only retired a couple, I think, 2 or 3 years ago now. So, very good, very underrated goaltender in his time. Never was an award guy, but played a very long time. And Chicago, Florida, Colorado, Ottawa, very long time, and then ended his career with Buffalo. I think I might have missed one in there, but I don't remember. Corey Schneider. I thought the Luongo-Schneider tandem was the best in the league, and so I had a lot of respect for Luongo and Schneider. Schneider then went to New Jersey, played with some pretty bad New Jersey teams, ended his career with the Islanders, but always have respect for Corey Schneider and the way he played in Vancouver. Jonas Hiller, I thought was an underrated goaltender, although people seem to think he was overrated. Anaheim in the playoffs, they really couldn't get it done with Hiller. That's why I feel like they ended up going with Frederik Andersen and then eventually John Gibson, who ended up getting them to conference finals appearances. But Hiller was a good goaltender, and I always liked him a lot. Mike Smith is my favorite goaltender of all time, not including all Blackhawks. I've never saw a guy that was just so motivated to play his position and did so well at it than Mike Smith. Only goalie on this board, I believe, to score a goal as well. Yeah. Mike Smith, loved him when he was in Phoenix. Had his Tampa hockey card, had his Phoenix hockey card, and did his career ended up in Calgary and Edmonton. But there's not a goalie that I loved more in my life than Mike Smith. I thought he was just the best. Jimmy Howard in Detroit. I liked Osgood as well, but Jimmy Howard I liked a lot more, and I really can't give a reason why. I think I just respected the way he played the game. Of course, I don't remember a lot of Osgood, considering his end of the career was mostly when I was growing up. So Jimmy Howard is the Detroit Red Wings goaltender I remember most. And of course, Detroit, you had so many goaltenders. You had Osgood, you had Vernon, you had Hasek, you had Legacy, you had Osgood and Hasek again, you had Cujo. And then Howard ended up being the next one. And Howard did well. I thought Howard was a good goaltender. The team around him, though, by the time he came in, it was a falling apart team. And as I throw my marker across the floor, he couldn't backstop the team anymore by the time he was done. Dwayne Roloson hopped around a bit. Very clutch goaltender. Again, people will say in 2006, if he never gets hurt, Edmonton wins the Stanley Cup. What people forget about that, though, Edmonton was up, I think, 3-0 and then 4-1 in Game 1 of that final. Roloson let in the next 3 goals. And then Brind'Amour ended up scoring the fluky tying one on Conklin. Edmonton still loses Game 1, whether or not Roloson was in the net, I think. Just Carolina's momentum really carried them. I don't really think Carolina would have lost that final. I mean, Roloson, could he have won this? Did he drag this team to the final pretty much? Yes. Carolina had a really good year. They had a lot of good players. You never know. I mean, most fans are convinced. I'm really not. I mean, Roloson was good. Carolina wins the Cup in 7. Should have probably been in 5. Edmonton kind of got lucky in Game 5 there. But, yeah. So, yeah, this is kind of this voice crack. This is my Hall of Fame. And let me know down below, who are your favorite players that maybe never got the recognition, or you thought, well, just players you liked. Who are just random players that you just liked that played the game? And who would you induct into your own personal Hall of Fame? I want to thank you all so much for watching this video, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.